Good day, dear friends. We are delighted to welcome you to Potsdam, a city where history comes alive at every step, where art intertwines with politics and architecture becomes the language of power, taste, and time. Today, we embark together on a journey through the pages of European history. We will see palaces where kings sought solitude and glory, parks created according to the laws of harmony and the philosophy of the Enlightenment, and buildings where the fate of the 20th century was decided.
Potsdam is not merely a suburb of Berlin. It is a city, an open-air museum where one can feel how ideas are transformed into stone and landscape. From the refined Rococo of Sanssouci Palace to the English coziness of Sicilienhof. From the meticulously designed parks of Frederick the Great to the atmospheric lanes of the Dutch Quarter.
We invite you not to look through the eyes of a tourist, but through the gaze of a researcher, to listen to the epoch, to notice the details, to discover the connections between architecture and history, between form and meaning. For Potsdam is a remarkable laboratory for all who seek to explore how culture creates space, and how space, in turn, gives rise to culture.
Getting from Berlin to Potsdam is very easy by public transport. From Berlin Central Station or Zoologischer Garten Station, take the S-Bahn line S7. It will bring you to Potsdam Central Station in about half an hour. When you leave the station toward Babelsberger Strasse and the Old Town, turn left and cross the Havel River via the bridge. After about 10 minutes, you will reach the historic Old Market Square. A useful landmark is the majestic green dome of St. Nicholas's Church. Along the way, we will briefly recall the history of Potsdam.
Once upon a time, long, long ago, there stood, in the place where the Havel River flowed gently between hills and sands, only a small, smoky village, Potsdam. Here the first Slavs harnessed the wind, and over their reed-thatched houses cranes drifted by, calling lazily to each other through the mist. The land was fertile, the pace of life unhurried. The people caught fish, tended their cattle, and prayed to their gods, unaware that their little village would one day become the residence of kings and the garden of Europe. The history of Potsdam spans more than 1,000 years. The city's origins were marked by the resistance of the Slavic population against the Holy Roman Empire, which ultimately ended with the victory of Count Albert the Bear in 1150. In 1157, he founded the Margraviate of Brandenburg, a historic principality, thus becoming the first Margrave of Brandenburg.
Then came the 13th century, with German knights, crosses on their cloaks, and castles of stone. In 1304, Potsdam was mentioned for the first time in a document as a small town. Potsdam now belonged to the electorate of Brandenburg, a small but important junction on the river, where guards collected tolls and peasants traded rumors. At that time, it was more of a fortified outpost than a city. Since 1416, Potsdam has been in the possession of the Hohenzollern family.
But one day, everything changed. At the dawn of the 17th century, when Europe was shrouded in wars and smoke, the Hohenzollern electors had grown weary of cannon fire and the burdens of governing in Berlin. Then one of them, Frederick William, known as the Great Elector, declared, "Here shall be peace, fresh air, and my garden." Thus, Potsdam became more than just a town. It became the very breath of power and dream. Here, the first avenues were planted, straight Prussian streets were drawn, taut as the strings of a violin, and in place of fishermen's huts rose white Baroque facades.
And then came King Frederick II, the one whom posterity would call the Great. He did not love the noise of Berlin and found in Potsdam his true inspiration. Here he played the flute, conversed with Voltaire, and built Sanssouci Palace without cares. Gardeners loosened the soil for the vines, sculptors carved gods from stone, and the king himself, between music rehearsals, wrote his philosophical reflections. the city blossomed, light and graceful, like a dream of an age of enlightenment.
Then the 19th century stepped onto the stage, the age of iron, smoke, and marching music. Potsdam became the heart of the Prussian army, the city of parades, spurs, and drums. Through its streets marched guardsmen in tall shakos, and across the lakes shimmered the reflections of the barracks silhouettes. Here King Frederick William III taught his sons discipline, and later, in the 20th century, the Hohenzollerns watched their empire crumble, while Potsdam preserved the memory of both grandeur and tragedy.
When the year 1945 came, Potsdam became a witness to a new chapter of history. In the war-damaged Sicilienhof Palace, under the soft glow of the lamps and the lingering scent of smoke, Stalin, Churchill, and Truman met to decide the fate of the world. And the city that had outlived kings now bore witness to the end of one era and the beginning of another. Then came silence. The wall. Half a century of division. Potsdam slept, as if beneath ice, until the wind of change once again swept through its streets. Today, it is a city of parks, palaces, students, and music. In the evening, when the sun sets behind the dome of St. Nicholas's Church and the riverbanks once more breathe the scent of linden trees, time seems to stand still. One hears the rustle of the leaves, like Frederick's flute, and the gentle ripple of the Havel, the ancient voice that remembers everything.
After crossing the bridge over the Havel, we see a massive historic building with rose and light brown walls. It is the reconstructed Old City Palace of Potsdam, now home to the Parliament of Brandenburg. With its magnificent Baroque facade, it faces the lively main avenue, while the opposite side of the palace, with the Fortuna Gate, opens onto the Old Market Square. Following the small alley along the eastern side of the palace, we continue toward the Old Market.
The Old Market Square is the embodied memory of Potsdam. It has witnessed the splendor of the Prussian kings, the destruction of war, and the quiet rebirth that followed, when people restored the city's face stone by stone. Once, this place was filled with the bustle of the marketplace, the clinking of copper coins, the shouts of merchants, the aroma of fresh bread and spiced sausages. Today, the sounds are different. The soft shuffle of tourist footsteps, the rustle of leaves, and the ringing of the bells from the dome of St. Nicholas's Church, rising heavenward like a prayer. The most majestic building on the square is the Protestant Church of St. Nicholas, austere and radiant, as if it were faith itself carved in stone. Its green dome, like aged copper, can be seen from afar and seems to gather all the sky of Brandenburg within it, only to return it to the people as light and peace.
The history of the church began even before the Prussian era. In the mid-13th century, a modest parish church stood here. At that time, Potsdam was just a small settlement surrounded by swamps and meadows. But over the centuries, the town grew, and the church grew with it, reflecting its destiny like a mirror. In the 18th century, the church found new life, as Potsdam, founded by the great Elector Frederick William, and, after 1701, promoted by the first king in Prussia, Frederick I, became the second royal residence after Berlin. A significant expansion of the city began in 1715, after the accession of the soldier king, Frederick William I, thanks to the influx of craftsmen, and especially through the relocation of the Royal Guard to Potsdam.
And then came the 19th century, the century of architectural dreams. During this time, Carl Friedrich Schinkel, the most important architect of Prussian classicism, designed what millions of visitors admire today, a majestic temple carved in stone, inspired by ancient forms and Roman basilicas. St. Nicholas's Church, the central work of neoclassical architecture, was built between 1830 and 1837, according to Schinkel's design. Its 77-meter-high dome, reminiscent of the Pantheon and rising above the rooftops of the city, was completed between 1843 and 1850. Schinkel's pupils Ludwig Perseus and Friedrich August Stüler were entrusted with overseeing the construction. Before the eyes of Potsdam, a monument arose that was both a church and a philosophical statement. The entrance, with its austere Corinthian columns, as if borrowed from Athens, and the steps leading up to the door, where each footstep sounds like a prelude to prayer. On the triangular pediment, we see an impressive relief depicting scenes from Christ's Sermon on the Mount. The sculptural group was reconstructed between 2015 and 2018 by Potsdam sculptor Rudolf Bohm, based on historical images.
And inside, space and light. White walls, the gentle curves of arches, and that wonderful feeling of touching something eternal and true. The height of the interior reaches 52 meters to the top of the brick inner dome. The transition from the square floor plan to the round drum of the dome is formed by 4 pendentives, triangular surfaces that contain painted medallions of the 4 great prophets of the Old Testament: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. These paintings were created in the 1840s under the direction of the renowned artist Peter von Cornelius, one of the leading figures of the Nazarene movement, an artistic school that sought the spirituality and purity of early Christian art. All the figures are painted against a golden background, emphasizing their prophetic, timeless nature and enhancing the sense of light radiating down from beneath the dome.
The connection to the figures of the Old Testament continues in the circular drum of the dome. The sculptural decoration of the 14 niches with biblical figures was created by students of the sculptors Christian Daniel Rauch and Johann Gottfried Schadow.
Behind the church's altar, we see monumental 19th century paintings created in the spirit of Christian classicism. The decoration of the apse, the semicircular niche in the eastern part of the church, forms a 2-tiered iconographic program that originated in the 1840s, at the same time the building was completed. It was executed in the style of the Nazarenes, those artists who sought to unite strict classical form with the spiritual purity of early Christian art. The central theme is the unity of prophetic word and apostolic testimony, the connection between the Old and the New Testament. In the upper register, set among palm trees and against a background of golden radiance, appear the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each accompanied by his traditional symbol: Mark with the lion, John with the eagle, Matthew with the angel, and Luke with the ox. They are seated on clouds, turned toward the invisible Christ, thus linking the earthly and heavenly realms. The palm trees between them symbolize paradise and eternal renewal.
Beneath the evangelists, in the arcades set against a golden background, are depicted the 12 apostles, the closest disciples of Jesus Christ. These figures symbolize the church as the community of witnesses who carry the faith into all the world. They stand, as it were, on the boundary between the altar, where the sacrifice is performed, and the heavenly vault, where eternal truth dwells.
The painting of the apse, like the paintings in the dome, was created under the artistic direction of Peter von Cornelius and executed by his students in the 1840s. The technique used is tempera on dry plaster, characterized by golden backgrounds and a clear, balanced line. The color palette is dominated by ochre gold tones, with gentle purples and emerald hues in the draperies. Everything is subordinated to the idea of light as a symbol of revelation. This painting is not mere decoration, but a continuation of Schinkel's architectural and theological vision. The dome with the prophets proclaims the coming word, The apse with the evangelists and apostles fulfills it, and the altar below becomes the meeting place of heaven and earth. Thus, the entire church interior forms a vertical theological symphony. Prophets, evangelists, apostles, faith of the people.
The 20th century did not spare the church. In 1945, during the final days of the war, it was heavily damaged. The dome pierced, the interior burned out. The city lay in ruins, and only decades later did people find the strength to restore the Church of St. Nicholas to its former face. The restoration took a long time, almost like an act of penance. In 1981, the church opened its doors once again, and Potsdam seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Its sky had found its anchor once more.
The obelisk, erected under King Frederick II, was part of the transformation of the old market square into a space inspired by Roman motifs. 4 medallions originally depicted the Brandenburg Prussian electors and kings. Severely damaged during World War II in 1945, the obelisk was restored in 1979. During the restoration, the princely portraits were replaced with reliefs of prominent architects who had contributed to the buildings surrounding the old market. Among them are Georg Wenceslaus von Knobelsdorff, Karl von Gontard, Karl Friedrich Schinkel, and Ludwig Persius, the builders of the neoclassical Church of St. Nicholas. The portraits of the architects were created by sculptors Rudolf Böhm and Walter Rentsch. Thus, the obelisk was transformed from a princely monument into a monument to architects, unique in all of Germany.
Opposite the church rises a majestic palace with a gleaming dome above its entrance portal, atop which, seemingly floating above time, the golden goddess Fortuna stands, turning in the wind. She is the symbol of fickle fortune, and it seems as though she guards the destiny of this place. Once, in the mid-18th century, fanfares resounded here, carriages rattled over the cobblestones, and silk gowns rustled. Frederick the Great resolved to make Potsdam the jewel of his kingdom, and commissioned architect Georg Wenceslaus von Knobelsdorff to create a building that would be not merely a palace, but a symbol of Prussian power and refined taste. Thus, on the banks of the Havel, there arose a Baroque edifice, reminiscent of the Italian palazzi, with austere lines, harmonious proportions, and rich ornamentation, all expressed with Prussian discipline.
It was the winter residence of the kings, the younger sister of the sunlit Sanssouci Palace. If Sanssouci was the place of philosophy, music, and leisure, then the city palace was the place of decisions, power, and courtly life. Its windows looked out onto the square where urban life pulsed, while behind its walls could be heard the footsteps of ministers, the whisper of advisors, and the scratching of the pen that signed royal decrees.
But then came the 20th century. War, fire, the roar of airplanes. In the spring of 1945, the palace was heavily damaged. It stood there, blackened, wounded, yet still alive. In 1959, despite international protests, and even though the building had already been recognized as a historic monument, the authorities of the GDR decided to demolish the palace ruins. The communist regime sought to erase the memory of the Prussian past. In the place of the royal residence, only emptiness remained, a silent memorial of history.
Half a century later, Potsdam sought to reclaim its heart. A long and passionate debate began. Should the palace be rebuilt? What is more important, memory or ideology, the past or the present? In the end, the idea of continuity prevailed. Citizens, architects, and historians joined forces. combining their knowledge and passion. In 2010, reconstruction of the palace began, not as a museum of monarchy, but as a house of democracy. And so, in 2014, the palace gates opened once more. But this time, it was not kings who entered, but the elected representatives of the Brandenburg State Parliament.
The reconstructed building replicates as closely as possible the historic Baroque palace of Frederick the Great, including the famous Fortuna Gate, which had already been rebuilt in 2002. Inside, however, stands a modern parliamentary building. Beneath the vaults where once the fate of an empire was decided, debates are now held about the future of the federal state. The beautifully restored structure serves as the seat of the Brandenburg State Parliament. On its roof are a cafe and a public viewing terrace, offering a splendid panorama of the city, with views of St. Nicholas's Church and the Old Town Hall.
Directly opposite the city palace and next to St. Nicholas's Church stands Potsdam's Old Town Hall. This place forms the historic heart of the city, where in the 18th century, power, religion, and civic life intersected. The Old Town Hall was built by order of Frederick William I, the father of Frederick the Great, who sought to give Potsdam a unified architectural appearance. The architect was Jean-Laurent Léger, a Frenchman at the Prussian court. Karl von Gontard and Georg Wenceslaus von Knobelsdorff, the creators of the architectural ensemble of Potsdam's city centre, also contributed to the design. The building was executed in the late Baroque style, marking a transition toward classicism.
The main facade is adorned with a tall dome crowned by a statue of Atlas bearing the globe. This globe symbolizes civic responsibility and the burden of power, an idea rather uncommon in secular architecture. The facade is further decorated with Ionic columns, stucco ornaments, and elegant Baroque gables, all characteristic of the royal Baroque style so prevalent in Potsdam. Since its completion in 1755, the building served as the seat of the city administration, hosting meetings of the mayor and the city council. Later, it housed administrative offices, ceremonial halls, and the city archives. Like much of Potsdam's city centre, the town hall was severely damaged during the air raids of April 1945. After the war, it was rebuilt, preserving both the original facade and the dome with Atlas on top.
Today, the Old Town Hall houses the House of Brandenburg Prussian History, which hosts historical and art exhibitions, rotating displays on Potsdam's past, lectures, and educational programs. When you stand before the Old Town Hall, look up. Atlas carries the globe, as if to remind us that every city rests upon the shoulders of its citizens. And this gesture of the Bronze Titan is the most beautiful metaphor for Potsdam, a city that has risen again and again from its ruins, preserving its dignity, beauty, and memory.
Next door stands the Museum Barberini, one of the most fascinating buildings in Potsdam. Today, it is a modern art center, yet its walls preserve nearly 3 centuries of history. It all began in 1771, when King Frederick II the Great sought to transform Potsdam into a city of art, a northern Rome on the Havel. He commissioned the architect Karl von Gontard to construct a palace inspired by the famous Palazzo Barberini in Rome, the residence of the papal Barberini family, a symbol of the Baroque and of human genius. Thus arose the Potsdam Palais Barberini, a light, graceful building, as if drawn from light itself. Here, guests of the royal court were received, music filled the air, and grand balls were held. From the square, one could enjoy a sweeping view over the Havel, and in the reflection of the water, the building appeared almost unreal, like a mirage of the Age of Enlightenment.
But in the spring of 1945, everything vanished in flames. The bombings reduced the palace to ruins. For decades, this place remained an emptiness, a gaping wound in the heart of Potsdam. More than half a century passed. Then, in the 21st century, as old Potsdam began to regain its former face, a man appeared who believed that art could bring not only walls, but also memory, back to life. Hasso Plattner, entrepreneur and patron of the arts in the field of software technology. He took on the reconstruction of the palace to create within it an art museum for Potsdam. Plattner had previously donated a significant portion of the funds for restoring the facade of the nearby Potsdam city palace. Now he decided to resurrect the Palais Barberini and transform it into a museum of international standing. Between 2013 and 2016, the architects achieved something close to a miracle. The facade was reconstructed according to the original 18th century plans, while the interior became a space of the 21st century, bright, open, and filled with air. In January 2017, the Museum Barberini opened its doors once again, as a symbol of the new Potsdam, a city in which history and modernity have found harmony.
When one enters the halls of the museum, it feels as though the very walls were created to let the art of light live within them. And that is no coincidence, for here resides one of the largest collections of Impressionist art in Europe. On the walls hang works by Claude Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, Sisley, Bertha Morisot, and Cézanne. These paintings, created on plein air, are filled with air, reflections of light, and fleeting moments. One almost hears the rustling of leaves and sees the wind playing upon the water, for the Impressionists did not paint things, but rather the feeling of time itself. And in that lies a remarkable parallel to the history of the building. It too is like an Impressionist painting, reborn, ever-changing, and alive.
Alongside its permanent collection, the museum also hosts temporary exhibitions, ranging from the old masters to contemporary artists. Paintings travel here from the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum, and the Musée d'Orsay, as if these cities were speaking to one another through Potsdam. In the spring of 2025, an exhibition of works by Wassily Kandinsky was presented here. The museum lives, breathes, and transforms. Just like Potsdam itself, a city that was once destroyed, yet has succeeded in becoming a city of art.
Consider what it means when private initiative gives a city back its cultural heart. The Museum Barberini stands as an example of how architecture and art can unite past and present, monarchy and democracy, Baroque and modernity. And when you stand before its facade and see its reflection shimmering in the waters of the Havel, one might say, Potsdam once again sees itself as Frederick the Great once dreamed it, as a city where beauty and reason speak the same language.
From the old market square, we reach the west side of the old city palace. On the western facade of the new building, one can read the inscription, Ceci n'est pas un château, French, for "This is not a palace," a reference to the building's modern function as the seat of the Brandenburg State Parliament. At the western end of the main wing stands the picturesquely reconstructed gilded angel staircase. This open double staircase with two landings once led to the second floor, to the private chambers of Frederick II. Today, it serves only a decorative purpose, recalling the elegance of the royal residence that once stood here.
The Colonnade of the Wrestlers once connected the Potsdam City Palace with the royal stables. It owes its name to the sandstone statues of wrestlers positioned between the columns. A counterpart once stood along the Havel River, south of the palace, the so-called Havel Colonnade. The Colonnade of the Wrestlers was built in the 1740s by Georg Wenceslaus von Knobelsdorff, based on the design by King Frederick II himself. Since May 2015, the colonnade has been under restoration. At its historic site, 7 pairs of columns have been reassembled. These sculptures serve not only as decoration, but also embody the ideals of courage, athletic spirit, and perhaps military discipline, values that reflected the Prussian cultural ethos of the 18th century.
Potsdam is not only the city of palaces, parks, and Prussian architecture, it is also the cradle of German cinema, where for more than a century, films have been created that have shaped the cultural history of Europe. At the heart of this legacy lie the Babelsberg Film Studios and its guardian, the Film Museum Potsdam. This museum is considered the oldest film museum in Germany, with its own collection and permanent exhibitions. It is housed in a historic building, the former royal stables of the Prussian kings, located right next to the Potsdam City Palace. This Baroque structure from the 17th century is remarkable not only for its exhibitions, but also for its impressive architecture.
The history of film in Potsdam began in 1912 when the Babelsberg Film Studios were founded, the oldest continuously operating film production site in the world. Today, it is far more than just a film studio. It is a modern media complex, bringing together numerous institutions and companies from the media industry. Also located in the Babelsberg district is the Film University Babelsberg Konrad Wolf, the oldest and one of the most prestigious film and television schools in Europe. For Potsdam, cinema is not merely a part of the city's economy, but a central cultural tradition. Potsdam is often called the European Hollywood, yet, unlike its American counterpart, it embodies the spirit of European art, depth, philosophy, and an awareness of history.
A visit to the Babelsberg district is not part of our one-day excursion program, but if you have time, you should definitely explore this largest district of Potsdam. In addition to the film park Babelsberg, an amusement park dedicated to film and television, the area is home to the beautiful Babelsberg Park and the former Imperial Palace located within it. The Babelsberg Palace, a neo-Gothic structure from the 19th century, was built by order of Emperor Wilhelm I. Both the palace and the park were designed by some of the most renowned architects of their time, including Karl Friedrich Schinkel. Within the park, you will also be captivated by the romantic Flato Tower, built in the neo-Gothic style in the mid-19th century.
But now we set out for Sanssouci Park, to visit its palaces and stroll through its shaded avenues. To save time and energy, we will board bus number 605 here, near the City Palace, in the direction of Science Park West, and ride for about 15 minutes to the stop Neues Palais, New Palace. The New Palace is the farthest point of our route. From there, we will continue on foot towards Sanssouci Palace.
The Sanssouci Palace and Park Complex, its name meaning "without worries" in French, is one of the most famous sites in Germany. The palace itself was built as the summer residence of King Frederick II the Great, and took its name as an expression of his ideal of a life of leisure, Sanssouci. The estate is part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site known as the Palaces and Parks of Potsdam and Berlin. The park covers about 290 hectares and includes more than 70 kilometers of walking paths. It is easy to lose oneself here, so we invite you to follow our guided route to discover the most interesting and significant landmarks. You should plan to spend around 2 hours for this walk.
The New Palace is the final symphony of Frederick the Great. It stands at the western edge of Sanssouci Park, where the sunlit terraces give way to solemn avenues. Stone and brick, gold and marble, light and shadow. Everything here was created not for solitude, but as a demonstration of power. If Sanssouci Palace was a dream of peace, the New Palace is a hymn to victory and glory. Frederick the Great commissioned its construction in 1763. After the cannons of the 7 Years' War had fallen silent, Europe expected to see a weary and impoverished king. Yet he ordered the building of a palace such as Prussia had never seen before. "Let everyone see," said Frederick, "that the state remains rich and strong despite the war." The new palace served a representative function, continuing to do so even after the foundation of the German Empire in 1871.
Before us rises a building nearly 200 meters long, created in Baroque splendor, yet already touched by the spirit of emerging classicism. On its roof stands a forest of statues, allegories, ancient gods, and muses, as if brought to life by triumph itself. Some of these figures reach up to 2.5 meters in height. The facade gleams with red brick, white columns, and gilded ornaments. The 55-meter-high dome is crowned by the 3 golden graces: Aglaia, the shining; Euphrosyne, joy; and Thalia, festivity, symbols of beauty, abundance, and delight. They raise a cushion upon which rests the royal crown. Frederick himself never lived here. He remained in his small, sunlit Sanssouci, while the new palace was meant for ceremonial occasions, for a world that loved to be seen. Here, balls, concerts, and diplomatic receptions were held. Every hall is a performance, every column part of a symphony of power and culture. The king once said, "Sanssouci, that is for me. The new palace, for my state."
Inside the new palace, there are more than 200 rooms, though visitors may enter only the most significant and magnificent halls of the 18th and 19th centuries. The museum combines a historical exhibition from the time of Frederick the Great with the interiors of the era of Frederick William IV, revealing how the palace lived and evolved over 2 centuries. The staterooms of Frederick the Great, the Marble Hall, the Grotto Hall, and the Hall of Giants form an architectural hymn to Prussian grandeur and glory. The Palace Theatre is one of the few surviving court theatres of the 18th century still in use today. It hosts concerts and opera performances, presented in historical costumes, allowing visitors to experience the splendour of the Prussian court through music and art.
The royal apartments of Frederick the Great and Frederick William IV showcase the art and culture of the 18th century, featuring paintings, furniture, porcelain, and bronze works. A particular pride of the palace is its collection of Flemish paintings and Berlin porcelain. Regular special exhibitions are held, dedicated to Prussian history, architecture, music, and court life. At present, the palace is undergoing partial restoration, yet the museum remains open to visitors.
When Frederick the Great completed the construction of the new palace around 1769, he wished that his palace of glory should not stand in solitude within the park, but have a worthy architectural counterpart. Thus arose the magnificent colonnade connecting 2 symmetrical buildings, the so-called Communs or Cavalierhäuser. Together, they form the monumental facade of the Cour d'Honneur, a majestic gateway to the palace and, symbolically, a portal to Frederick's realm of art and reason. The colonnade consists of a series of Corinthian columns arranged in a semicircle, at the center of which stands a triumphal arch, graceful yet solemn. It seems to welcome guests as they enter the domains of Frederick the Great, and serves as the architectural culmination of the visual axis that runs through the entire Sanssouci Park. The architect of this ensemble was Karl von Gontard, one of Frederick the Great's favorite master builders.
On both sides of the arch stand 2 identical buildings, the Communs, light, elegant structures with domes and columned porticos. They served not only as a decorative frame for the ensemble, but also had a practical function. Within them were the guest apartments and court quarters. Here lived officers, scholars, musicians, and the trusted companions of Frederick, who were invited to Potsdam. Later, These buildings also housed members of the royal family and honored guests attending receptions at the new palace.
Today, both the Communs and the Colonnade belong to the University of Potsdam. A continuous, partial restoration of these historic buildings is underway, after decades of neglect during the Communist GDR period. Inside, they now house faculties of the humanities, a library, and lecture halls. Students walk each day through the very triumphal arch beneath which the guards of Frederick the Great once marched. When viewed from the palace, the arch and colonnade appear as the frame of a painting. When seen from the opposite side, facing the palace, they become its prologue. Between the two lies a spacious square, where space itself becomes architecture, silence becomes music, and stone becomes language.
From the new palace, we now make our way towards Sanssouci Palace. Though not along the main avenue that cuts straight through the park like an arrow, but along the poetic path, the route once closest to the heart of Frederick the Great. From the garden forecourt of the new palace, we turn to the right. This path speaks not of power, but of reflection, music, and nature. Like a chapter from a philosophical novel in which every structure is a metaphor. We find ourselves within an English landscape garden, with winding paths, picturesque meadows, and poetic groves. Sculptures, pavilions, and fountains appear suddenly before us, as if emerging from the painted landscapes of Claude Lorraine.
Between the green lindens and oaks, a small round temple suddenly appears, like a miniature ancient pavilion. This is the Temple of Friendship, one of the most touching places in the park. It was built in 1768, designed by Frederick the Great himself together with the architect Carl von Gontard. The temple is dedicated to the memory of Princess Wilhelmine of Bayreuth, the beloved sister and spiritual companion of Frederick. He called her "my second soul." The structure is a circular rotunda with Corinthian columns. At its center stands a statue of the seated Wilhelmine. Medallions on the column shafts depict pairs of friends from antiquity, and the book in her hand symbolizes the education and love of classical culture that the Margravine cherished.
We continue along the narrow path, and after a few minutes a delicate pavilion comes into view, enchanting us with its green and gold elegance. This is the Sonnenpavillon, built in the 19th century during the reign of Frederick William IV. Its filigree lattice structure seems woven from light itself. In summer, the shadows of the leaves dance across the sandstone, like watercolor washes on paper. The pavilion served as a place of repose, for reading, taking tea, and small flute concerts. In contrast to the Baroque pavilions of Frederick the Great, the Sonnenpavillon embodies pure romanticism, simplicity, transparency, and the harmony of human and nature, entirely without pomp or grandeur.
Our path now leads us into the heart of the park, where, among the lindens and chestnut trees, the Chinese house suddenly gleams in golden splendor. It seems as if it has stepped straight out of an 18th century fairy tale illustration. A pagoda-shaped dome, columns formed as golden palm trees, and at their feet, figures of Chinese musicians and tea drinkers, delighting in lotus blossoms. Frederick the Great had this little pavilion built between 1755 and 1764, at a time when Europe was fascinated by the Chinese taste. Yet it is not a mere imitation of the East, but rather a play of imagination, a homage to the longing for a distant, refined world ruled by harmony. Frederick loved to host summer tea gatherings here, sometimes accompanied by chamber music. It is said he once remarked, "If the world were as simple as this tea house, there would be no wars."
As we continue eastward, towards Sanssouci Palace, we reach the main avenue and the Musenrondel, the Circle of the Muses. In antiquity, the Muses held great significance as goddesses and protectresses of the arts. The word muse still lives on today in music and museum. Frederick II loved the arts and had sculptures placed here. The 8 marble statues of the Musenrondel were designed by Knobelsdorff and sculpted by Friedrich Christian Glum. They were created before 1752, but over time were destroyed. Today, replicas stand in their original positions, and the site preserves its meditative symmetry, encircled by avenues, with a central space for music and inspiration. Here, in the stillness, Frederick often played his flute, and it is said that the melodies rose above the trees and reached the terraces of Sanssouci.
From the Musenrondel, several paths lead off in different directions. One of them takes you to the small New Chambers Palace and the picturesque historic mill, places we will visit later. For now, however, we continue along the main avenue toward Sanssouci Palace. It is not far ahead.
The park breathes green, and all around us there is silence, until we hear the rushing sound of a fountain. But this is no ordinary fountain. It is joy itself, frozen in motion. The water shoots upward with a sound like laughter, then falls again, bursting into 1,000 glassy drops. They drift through the air, shimmering in all the colors of sunlight, and one feels as if a delicate rain of light were dancing around. Marble statues, gods, nymphs, and heroes standing all around, eternal witnesses to beauty. Since 1750, the basin of the Great Fountain has been surrounded by these marble figures: Venus, Mercury, Apollo, Diana, Juno, Jupiter, Mars, and Minerva, together with allegories of the 4 elements: fire, water, air, and earth.
Your gaze lifts to the columns, where the finely carved sculptures seem to float. Each figure, each detail, is like a breath of the human dream of harmony. Everything here is imbued with the spirit of the 18th century, and yet nothing feels distant or past. Here, time preserves rather than destroys. Here, for a moment, one may touch perfection. The fountain murmurs like music, the wind plays in the leaves, and the palace on the hill seems almost unattainable, like a dream. And suddenly, one understands why the palace is called Sanssouci, without worries. For whoever stands here, between the brilliance of water and marble, truly cannot think of worries. They dissolve into the light, the sound, and the delicate floating joy of being.
When Frederick the Great conceived this place, he did not wish for another royal residence. No. He sought a refuge from the thunder of politics, from the heavy gold of courtly ceremony. The architects were to create not merely a house, but a breath of nature. And so, Sanssouci Palace seems to grow out of the hill itself. Its terraces flow downward like vines heavy with grapes, and its pale yellow, stucco-clad walls reflect the sunlight as a gentle echo, as though they had learned to shine from the light itself.
We begin to ascend the terraces, step by step, slowly, as if unwilling to disturb the serenity of this place. With each new level, the world around us seems to grow quieter. The murmur of the fountain behind us fades into distant music. The leaves of the vines rustle ever more softly, and even the wind seems to walk beside us, not as a disturbance, but as a companion. The terraces of Sanssouci are not merely a staircase leading to the palace. They are a journey into another state of being. Below, life and movement glisten, but the higher you climb, the more you are surrounded by light and silence. In the air lingers the delicate scent of warm earth, of freshness, and of peace.
The vineyard terraces of Sanssouci form the heart of the park, crowned by a small palace that Frederick the Great affectionately called his Little Vintner's House. The architect of Sanssouci Palace was Georg Wenceslaus von Knobelsdorff, not only the royal master builder of Prussia, but also the king's kindred spirit. Knobelsdorff understood that the king was not seeking another Versailles, but rather a quiet retreat, a place where he could compose music, read Voltaire, and enjoy solitude. When Frederick the Great commissioned him in 1745 to design a palace without worries, Knobelsdorff created an elegant Rococo residence, intimate and refined, almost like chamber music in stone, far removed from the heavy grandeur of the Baroque. His architecture is poetry carved from stone, with gentle curves, graceful lines, and a perfect harmony with nature. He placed the palace not in the plain, but atop the Vineyard Hill, where everything is subordinate to sunlight and the green rhythm of the terraces. Here, surrounded by nature, the Prussian king delighted in the splendid views from his windows, spent his summer months, pursued his artistic passions, and at the same time attended to the affairs of state.
Directly on the terrace of the palace, where a special stillness always reigns, lies the grave of Frederick the Great, a simple, almost humble flower slab of dark rock. No splendor, no marble angels, no gold, only the inscription, Friedrich der Grosse, and his dates of life. No grand mausoleum, only sky, wind, vines, and a king's beloved dogs buried beside him. They had accompanied him in life, and he wished them to remain by his side in death. During his lifetime, Frederick the Great declared that he wished to be buried here, at his Sanssouci, among the vines in the sunshine. Yet his wish was not immediately granted. After his death in 1786, his body was interred in the garrison church of Potsdam. Only in 1991, 205 years later, were his remains finally brought here, to the place he had always longed for, to the terrace of his palace, into the earth where he had wished to find peace.
And the potatoes on his grave, they are a symbol of the people's gratitude. Frederick the Great was not only a warrior and philosopher, but also a reformer. He was the first in Germany to introduce the cultivation of the potato to protect his country from famine. At first, the people distrusted this earth fruit, believing it to be inedible. So the king devised a clever ruse. He ordered his soldiers to guard the potato fields, as if something rare and precious were growing there. Naturally, the curious peasants began to steal the tubers, and soon potatoes grew in every garden. In this way, Frederick saved thousands from starvation, and that is why, even today, visitors lay potatoes on his grave. Not flowers, not wreaths, but a simple tuber as a sign of respect, gratitude, and remembrance.
Inside the palace, there is today a museum. The marble hall is the heart of Sanssouci. White and rose-colored marble, Corinthian columns, and golden ornamentation. Not for ostentatious splendor, but for the perfection of harmony. Here Frederick the Great received his guests, played music, and held conversations with philosophers.
The gallery, a long hall whose walls are adorned with paintings by French and Italian masters of the 17th century. Watteau, Poussin, Tiepolo. Light pours in through the large windows and settles upon the gilded frames, so that it seems as though the paintings themselves are floating in the air.
The study of Frederick the Great is the most personal room in the entire palace, a small, almost ascetic chamber. On the desk lie his writing instruments, and on the walls hang portraits of great thinkers. Here, the king wrote letters to Voltaire, composed music, and made political decisions. Its greatest ornament is simplicity itself, not the lavish chamber of a monarch, but the workshop of a philosopher.
Frederick the Great was a flutist and composer, and it was here, in the music room, that chamber concerts were held on many evenings. The hall is adorned with pastoral frescoes, and the ceiling appears light and airy, like the very music that once filled the space. In this room, Johann Sebastian Bach himself performed, and his son, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, served at the Prussian court.
Behind the palace opens a semicircular courtyard, with a colonnade as graceful as a musical phrase. It is not a grand entrance, but rather an architectural sigh, the continuation of a dream of harmony, where lines do not press but flow. The colonnade was designed not to separate the palace from the garden, but to gently unite them, the realm of man and the realm of nature. Slender Ionic columns form a half-circle that seems to embrace the space, guiding the gaze onward, toward the trees, the sky, and the hills of Potsdam. Looking beyond, through the green avenues and fountains, one's eyes rest upon ruins on a hill. But these are not true ruins. They are the Ruinenberg, the Hill of Ruins, artfully created by Frederick the Great in the 18th century. He had these pseudo-antique ruins constructed as a reminder of the transience of human works and the grandeur of nature. In reality, the hill was part of the technical water system for the park's fountains. On its summit were water reservoirs, around which the facade of an ancient temple was built. Yet Frederick, the aesthete, could not imagine a mere cistern. Even the useful had to be poetic. Thus arose these artificial yet meaningful ruins, a monument of stone and reflection.
When you walk along the avenue behind Sanssouci Palace, where the vines sway softly in the wind, you suddenly hear a creaking sound. Not loud, not disturbing, but as if the air itself were whispering an old song. It is the windmill, its sails slowly turning against the sky of Potsdam. It has stood there for almost 3 centuries, modest, wooden, yet proud, like a guardian watching over the peace of the palace. It is said that when Frederick the Great had Sanssouci built, the mill already stood upon the hill, and one day, when the king, during one of his musical evenings, heard the rattling of the millstones, he offered to buy the mill so that nothing would disturb the tranquility of his residence. But the miller replied calmly, "Your Majesty, if there were no justice in Prussia, this mill would not be standing here."
The king smiled. He was a philosopher, and the answer pleased him. The mill remained standing. Thus was born the legend of the king and the miller, a story about the right of the common man to be equal before the law, even before the king himself. Whether it is truth or merely myth no longer matters. Since then, the mill has become a symbol of freedom and justice, a reminder that greatness lies not in walls, but in the ability to listen.
Opposite the old mill appears an elongated, graceful building with a gently curved gable. No pomp, no excess. Everything about it is balanced and refined, as if drawn with a delicate brush. It was here, in 1747, that Frederick the Great had the old orangery house converted into a guest palace, intended to host those he regarded as his kindred spirits, philosophers, musicians, and diplomats. The architect was Carl von Gontard, a student and successor of Knobelsdorff's aesthetic ideals. He created a structure in the style of late Rococo, where everything is subordinated to the beauty of line and the rhythm of light. The former guest palace, located southwest of Sanssouci Palace, forms a counterpart to the picture gallery on the eastern side. Separated by rows of trees and terraces, the two buildings flank the summer palace above, reflecting its architecture in perfect harmony.
Inside the new chambers, there is also a museum that captivates visitors with its intimate and elegant atmosphere. The marble hall and the guest rooms preserve the spirit of the 18th century. Here, small concerts, evenings of poetry, and philosophical conversations once took place. On the terrace, between the panoramic doors and windows, stand statues of Carrara marble, created by Italian sculptors after ancient models. These mythological figures embody untamed nature and recall the building's original function as an orangery. The garden in front of the palace is planted exclusively with cherry trees, the favorite trees of Frederick the Great, the Old Fritz. If you have a little more time, you can take a walk from the old mill to the Orangery Palace. Afterward, you should return to the bus stop, located opposite the colonnade.
The Orangery Palace is like the final grand chord in Potsdam's symphony. If Sanssouci Palace was Frederick the Great's dream of peace, then the Orangery became his successor's dream of Italy's eternal beauty. The Orangery Palace was built in the mid-19th century under King Frederick William IV, affectionately known as the Romantic King. He was an artist at heart, an admirer of Italian architecture, and he dreamed of creating in Potsdam a piece of Tuscany. Architects Ludwig Perseus, Frederick August Stüler, and Ludwig Ferdinand Hesse, and, according to some sources, Ludwig Forster, brought this dream to life, weaving in stone the forms of antiquity, the refinement of the Renaissance, and Prussian precision. The palace served both as a house of art and as a winter garden where orange trees, palms, laurels, and oleanders were kept, plants that could not have survived the harsh German winters.
In the central section of the palace are the state guest apartments and the art gathers. The greatest treasure among them is the collection of Raphael copies, commissioned by the king himself. This Raphael gallery, bathed in the soft light streaming through its tall windows, displays works such as the Sistine Madonna, the School of Athens, and other masterpieces of the Renaissance, lovingly recreated in homage to the ideals of that age. The halls are adorned with marble columns, stucco ornamentation, and frescoes, and the entire space radiates a solemn harmony. Standing here, one could easily believe oneself to be in Rome or Florence. The sun falls at the same angle, and the wind carries the same scent of grass and stone. And yet, this is Potsdam, and therein lies its magic. Here, the dreams of Europe meet and unite.
From Sanssouci Palace, we now return to the city center, to Luisenplatz, near the Brandenburg Gate of Potsdam. You can get there by taking bus number 695 toward the main train station. The stop is located opposite the Colonnade. After about 10 minutes, get off at the stop Luisenplatz Nord. Alternatively, you may walk. The stroll takes around 20 minutes.
The Brandenburg Gate in Potsdam is a nearly living boundary between time and space. It stands at the western edge of the Old Town like a guardian of a bygone century. Erected in 1770 by order of Frederick the Great, it became a monument to victory, the final chord of the 7 Years' War, when all Europe trembled under the march of armies. The king wished that Potsdam should have its own Gate of Glory, no less noble than those of the ancient emperors. And so, the architect Karl von Gontard breathed into the stone the spirit of antiquity. Double Corinthian columns, a powerful entablature, laurel wreaths, and the graceful figures of triumph and peace crowning the arch, all speak of victory, yet without boastfulness, in cool Prussian restraint.
When you step closer, you notice a remarkable detail. Each side of the gate is different. From the city side, it reveals grace, lightness, almost theatrical elegance. From the outer side, however, austerity, strength, and a military clarity of line. This contrast was intentional. For those entering Potsdam, the gate symbolized peace and repose. For those leaving, it served as a reminder of the state's strength. Today, the Brandenburg Gate of Potsdam leads a very different life. No victory processions pass beneath its arches anymore. Only the shadows of passers-by, the footsteps of tourists, the soft hum of bicycle wheels. Yet if you pause and rest your hand upon the cool stone, you may almost hear the whisper of the past, the roll of drums, the clink of spurs, the rustle of uniforms. And in this silence there is no sorrow, but dignity, as if the old city were gently saying, "We remember, but we live on."
From the Brandenburg Gate to the square by the Church of St. Peter and St. Paul stretches Brandenburger Street, straight and clear, like a string stretched between past and present. In the small park to the right, we see the musical clock, designed by Gottfried Hofer and crafted in the Meissen Clock Workshop. It was installed in 1979. The electric clock rests on 4 pillars and is made of steel, copper, brass, and gold leaf. Its crown is adorned with depictions of Potsdam cityscapes. Between the pillars hangs a shining golden sphere, which displays the time. Beneath the sphere are metal plates engraved with symbols representing various sciences and trades, such as astronomy and fishing on the Havel River. Every quarter hour, the clock plays the song In Spring by Hans Eisler, bright and clear in tone, and at each full hour, a complete verse is performed.
In the mid-19th century, Brandenburger Street became the main shopping street of Potsdam. Today, it is a charming promenade where the old facades seem to look at you kindly and gently. Beneath their stucco fronts lie small shops, antique stores, galleries and cafes, all imbued with an air of calm contentment. In summer, strings of lights stretch across the street, transforming it into a stage for street musicians, artists, and lovers who sit at tables enjoying a glass of white wine. In winter, the shop windows glow with the warm light of candles. The air is filled with the scent of cinnamon and mulled wine, and one feels as though Potsdam has once again become the little royal town where time has politely stopped to rest.
The perspective of Brandenburger Street is closed by the tall tower of St. Peter and Paul Church. The Church of Saints Peter and Paul was built in the mid-19th century, between 1867 and 1879. Architects August Stuhler and Wilhelm Salzenberg endowed Potsdam with a structure of classical balance and harmony. Previously, an old parish church had stood on this site, but it had become too small for the growing city. The new building was intended to serve as the center of Potsdam's Catholic community, for although the city was predominantly Protestant, under Frederick the Great it had become a multinational and multi-confessional city.
The church was built in the neo-Romanesque style, inspired by the early Christian basilicas of Rome and Ravenna. Its facade appears austere and harmonious. Two symmetrical towers, an arched central portal between them, and above it, a large rose window. The building material is yellow-red brick, typical of 19th century Potsdam architecture. From a distance, the church looks almost Italian, sunlit, graceful, yet monumental.
Inside, the space impresses with its tranquility and clarity of form. 3 naves, columns with arcades, and a gentle light filtering through the upper windows. There is no excessive splendor, only clarity, proportion, and quiet dignity. Particularly striking is the high altar, adorned with depictions of the apostles, as well as the organ, crafted by the Schucker workshop of Potsdam. It still sounds today during concerts and services, filling the church with a deep, velvety resonance.
For Potsdam, this church is a symbol of spiritual unity. It stands in a city where, only a few streets apart, rise the Orthodox Alexander Nevsky Church, the French Reformed Church, and the Protestant Church of Peace. Together, they are like different voices in a single choir. The Church of St. Peter and St. Paul remains vibrantly alive today. It hosts worship services, organ recitals, and Christmas concerts. If you come here at the end of the day, while Brandenburger Street glows in the light of the setting sun, the towers seem wrapped in gold, and the bell sounds softly in the evening wind. In that moment, Potsdam appears as a small, sheltered world, where the balance between the earthly and the heavenly still seems possible.
Just a 5-minute walk from the church stand the Nauen Gates, one of 3 surviving city gates of Potsdam, once part of the old fortifications. They once served as the entrance to Potsdam from the town of Nauen, hence their name. In 1755, 20 years before Neo-Gothic architecture became fashionable on the continent, architect Johann Gottfried Buring, following a design by Frederick the Great, built the Nauen Gates in the Gothic style, exactly as they can still be seen today. The old city gates had already fallen into disrepair, and the king desired a more representative entrance. Yet Frederick was not only a monarch, he was a refined aesthete, a friend of architects and philosophers, a lover of beauty. The Nauen Gates thus became one of the first buildings in Germany to be constructed in the neo-Gothic style, long before the movement spread across Europe.
At first glance, The Nauen gates impress with their strict symmetry, two round towers with battlements, connected by a mighty arch, like a fragment of a medieval castle transposed into the enlightened 18th century. Yet this severity is deceptive. It carries none of the heaviness of the Middle Ages. On the contrary, it feels almost theatrically elegant. The Gothic windows and arrow slits, the light proportions, and the decorative bands give the structure the character of a fairy tale portal, not a fortress. The facades are modestly adorned, almost British in their elegance, not by chance. Frederick the Great was inspired by English neo-Gothic, which he called the architecture of the Romantic spirit. Today, the Nauen gates form the heart of one of Potsdam's most charming districts. They mark the entrance to the historic Dutch Quarter. The square in front of the gates is a popular meeting place for locals, surrounded by cafes, restaurants, and bars, where life flows on gently and amiably.
The Dutch Quarter of Potsdam is a truly unique part of the city. The moment you turn from the Nauen gates, it feels as though you step into another world. Narrow lanes, red brick houses with white shutters, wrought iron signs, and the aroma of coffee and fresh pastries. Everything here speaks not of royal splendor, but of coziness and the quiet dignity of craftsmanship. The history of the quarter dates back to the 18th century. After the 30 Years' War, King Frederick William I, the father of Frederick the Great, resolved to transform Potsdam into a flourishing, orderly city of artisans. In the 1730s, he planned to bring Dutch craftsmen to Prussia, people renowned for their diligence and precision. To make them feel at home, the king ordered the construction of an entire district in the Dutch style. Thus, according to the designs of architect Jan Bouwman, there arose a unique ensemble of 134 brick houses, each slightly different, and yet together forming a harmonious whole of timeless charm.
The houses of the Dutch Quarter are 1 or 2 stories high, built of red brick, with the typical stepped gables and white window frames. The streets are narrow and cobbled, lit by old lanterns. Everything seems designed not for parades, but for strolls and quiet conversation. In earlier times, true craftsmen lived here: shoemakers, watchmakers, glaziers, and cabinet makers. Many houses had workshops on the ground floor and living quarters above. Later, in the 19th century, the quarter became home to artists, musicians, and students of the Academy of Arts. Today, the Dutch Quarter of Potsdam is considered the largest cohesive architectural ensemble in the Dutch style outside the Netherlands, a small piece of Amsterdam that continues to live on in the heart of Prussia.
From the Nauen gates, we stroll through the Dutch Quarter and, passing through the park, arrive at the French church. Potsdam once had a so-called French Quarter, where the Huguenots, Protestants who fled France at the end of the 17th and beginning of the 18th centuries, settled. However, little of that quarter has survived in the cityscape. During the Second World War, the French Quarter was almost completely destroyed. By some miracle, only the French church remained intact, although over time cracks appeared in its walls and water seeped into the foundation. Its restoration took many years and was completed only in 2003. Today, the French Church of Potsdam is once again active. This Reformed church, built in the 18th century to the plans of architect Jean-Pierre Barlier, stands on Französische Straße. Its architectural model was the Roman Pantheon, a strictly neoclassical structure with a dome and portico, serene and balanced in form.
And with that, dear friends, our one-day program in Potsdam comes to an end. To reach the main train station from the French church, walk about 500 meters to Platz der Einheit. From there, numerous public transport lines go directly to Potsdam Hauptbahnhof, main train station.
Potsdam, a city of rich history and culture. In Potsdam and its surroundings, there are 15 grand palaces, 17 vast parks, and 35 museums, all of which together form the Prussian Palaces and Gardens Foundation Berlin-Brandenburg. recognized as part of the UNESCO World Heritage. It is impossible to see everything in a single day. Our goal has been to introduce you to the most significant landmarks of this extraordinary city.
One must not fail to mention a place of such historical importance in Potsdam as Cäcilienhof Palace. Unfortunately, Cäcilienhof Palace has been closed since November 1, 2024, due to extensive restoration work. The renovations are expected to continue until autumn 2027. Our recommendation for all visitors wishing to explore Potsdam's museums and palaces. Please check in advance whether the site you plan to visit may be temporarily closed for restoration. During World War II and the GDR period, many historical buildings were damaged or fell into disrepair. Even today, extensive restoration and reconstruction efforts are being carried out to preserve this cultural heritage for future generations.
What took place at Cäcilienhof Palace is not merely a chapter of history. It is a moment in which, within the walls of an old house, the fate of the world was decided after the most devastating war in human history. At the northern edge of Potsdam, surrounded by the green meadows of the New Garden and lying gracefully on the shores of the Heiliger See, stands a charming residence that looks like an English country manor, with red brick walls, steep gabled roofs, and ivy climbing up its facades. This is Cäcilienhof Palace. It was built between 1914 and 1917 by order of Kaiser Wilhelm II for his eldest son, Crown Prince Wilhelm, and his wife, Crown Princess Cecilia of Mecklenburg-Schwerin, from whom the palace takes its name. Cecilia and Wilhelm indeed lived here happily until the First World War, and the fall of the monarchy changed everything. After 1918, the Hohenzollern family lost their political power but continued to reside at Cäcilienhof until 1945.
After the end of World War II, the fate of Germany and Europe demanded the establishment of a new political order. The Allied powers, the USSR, the United States, and Great Britain, decided to hold the last of the three great conferences of the anti-Hitler coalition. The chosen venue was Potsdam, and not by chance. Berlin lay in ruins, yet Cäcilienhof Palace had remained largely undamaged and could provide suitable accommodations for the delegations. The conference took place from July 17th to August 2nd, 1945. The participants were Joseph Stalin for the USSR, Harry Truman, who had succeeded the late Franklin D. Roosevelt for the United States, and Winston Churchill, later replaced after the British elections by his successor, Clement Attlee, for Great Britain.
At Cäcilienhof Palace, the Allied leaders deliberated on how defeated Germany would be divided, how post-war borders would be drawn, and how a new world order should be established. The key decisions were recorded in the Potsdam Agreement, which included the division of Germany into 4 occupation zones: Soviet, American, British, and French, the denazification, demilitarization, and democratization of Germany, the transfer of East Prussia, including Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, to Soviet administration, the establishment of the German-Polish border along the Oder-Neisse line, the decision to prosecute war criminals, which led to the Nuremberg trials. The conference also addressed issues such as reparations, the repatriation of prisoners of war, and the political restructuring of post-war Europe.
Today, Cäcilienhof Palace is a museum and part of the Potsdam Palaces and Parks Ensemble, which belongs to the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors can see the conference hall with its original table and chairs, as well as the working rooms of Stalin, Truman, and Churchill. Exhibited are also photographs, documents, telegrams, and maps from the time of the Potsdam Conference. In addition, parts of the preserved interiors from the era of the Crown Prince couple remain open to visitors. At present, the museum tour is available online. allowing people to explore this historic site virtually.
Not far from Sicilienhof Palace lies the Glinica Bridge, one of the most famous and enigmatic places in Potsdam. It connects not only two banks, but also the history, politics, and symbolism of the 20th century, and it became a legend even in its own time. The bridge spans a narrow waterway that links Lake Glinica with the Heilige See, Holy Lake. It stands along the old road from Potsdam to Berlin, right on the border between the federal states of Brandenburg and Berlin. And it was precisely this line that transformed the bridge in the 20th century from an ordinary crossing into one of the most famous borders in the world. The current iron structure of the Glinica Bridge was built in 1907 by engineer Friedrich Krause. It was damaged during World War II and rebuilt in 1949. After 1945, however, it found itself in a unique position. One side lay within the Soviet zone, later the GDR, and the other in the American sector, West Berlin. Thus, the bridge became a meeting point between two worlds.
That is where the bridge gets its famous nickname, the Bridge of Spies. From the late 1950s onward, the Glinica Bridge was used as a site for the exchange of captured agents between the USSR and the USA, right in the heart of the Cold War. In total, 3 major exchanges took place here. Since 1989, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the bridge has once again become a free crossing, a symbol of unity and reconciliation. The history of this bridge has inspired many writers and filmmakers. The most famous example is the 2015 film Bridge of Spies by Steven Spielberg, starring Tom Hanks. The movie tells the story of the first exchange in 1962 and was filmed with near-documentary precision. The cold, the fog, the hum of engines, the echo of footsteps on metal, all of it evokes the tension and mystery of that extraordinary moment in history.
Dear friends, our walk through Potsdam is drawing to a close. We have followed paths on which time has left its remarkable traces, from the old market square to Sanssouci Palace, from the majestic Brandenburg gates to the quiet lanes of the Dutch Quarter. We have looked through the windows of history, where the light of past centuries still shimmers, the light of Frederick the Great, of famous artists and architects, and of the countless unnamed craftsmen whose hands created this wonderful city. I sincerely hope that today's tour has not been an ending, but rather a beginning. The beginning of your own personal journey through Potsdam. And when you leave this city, may you carry with you the quiet warmth that lives here. The warmth of a city that knows how to be both grand and intimate at once. And may Potsdam always call you back. With the whisper of its fountains and parks, the gleam of its domes, and the gentle chime of its church bells. Goodbye, and until we meet again.